you should not ship something, or you shouldn't even execute an idea if you can't articulate the one thing that someone should walk away with after like consuming that. And if you can rally around that right at the beginning, you will have like such a better time brainstorming. People will be bought into your idea, and that just makes like the entire creative process a lot better.
Welcome to the Animals Podcast. I'm Ty Magnan, the CEO at Animals.
And I'm Tim Metz, the Director of Marketing and Innovation.
This season, we're focused on peeking behind the corporate curtains of enterprise content marketing teams and exploring how B2B SaaS giants run content operations at scale. Today, we're thrilled to be speaking with Kay-Kay Clapp. She is the head of content and social at Typeform and a deeply experienced content leader. Kay-Kay previously ran content marketing at my alma mater, Appcues. Big shout out to Appcues and the content that they produce, and has consistently led teams that create authentic, memorable content that both educates and delights. If you're like most B2B content marketers, you want to lead the conversation in your industry. At Animals, we help B2B software companies do exactly that by creating standout, survey-driven, state-of-the-industry type reports that help you grow your brand authority, backlinks, and pipeline. In just 12 weeks, we run a process that helps uncover narratives from a unique data set packaged into a beautifully designed flagship content asset that your whole team is going to be proud of. Book a consult now at animals.co/whitepapers and find out how to set the new benchmark for your industry. Kay-Kay, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's so wonderful to be here.
We're lucky to have you. So Kay-Kay, the first question we ask all of our guests is, what content are you consuming lately?
Yeah, so I was prepared for this question. I thought about it. And I got to be honest, Ty, it actually made me feel a little bit insecure. So I'm going to unpack that for a second. I used to be like a pro consumer of content. I was chronically online. I lived on Twitter. I digested so many podcasts, questionably useful Substacks. I was in Discord groups. And then last year I had a kid. And then my content consumption habits completely changed. And that is something I've kind of had some insecurity about, because when you work in content, and particularly in social, there is this expectation that you are always on and that you are at like the top of the cultural zeitgeist. So you can hop on trends and you can, figure out how you can join conversations in a way that's relevant to your brand. And that has actually been really hard for me. So I've had to be very intentional with the content that I am consuming. And so I do follow a lot of marketing and content thought leaders on LinkedIn, but lately, I've had to be really reliant on my team. So we have a prompt in Slack. What are you watching? What are you consuming? Why? And so that has been really helpful. And then I've also really relied on my peers for them to kind of tell me what's going on. And so, I've had this conversation with a few parents that are also kind of in content leadership roles. So I just wanted to say that for anyone that is feeling a little bit insecure like I am, I just wanted to make that point that there are other ways to kind of get that content. So yeah.
Nice. Love it. Yeah, definitely don't want you to feel insecure about that. Like for me, a lot of content I'm consuming lately, do you know this TV show or YouTube show Blippi?
Yes, because Blippi, Bluey, Miss Rachel. I got those on lock.
Yeah, that's content you're consuming. And I actually think you can take some inspiration from some of the what they're doing and pull it into a B2B context.
Absolutely. And I will say another thing that I think was unexpected for me this last year was I think there is always this thought that you have to be constantly consuming content. But now that I've slowed down a little bit, you consume content to get inspiration. And some of the best inspiration I've had is actually completely disconnecting, going on long walks with my kid. I've had some of my best content ideas just doing that. And so just a reminder to everyone to unplug every once in a while and go for the long walk.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, Tim's kind of I'm not going to say self-proclaimed productivity expert, but someone that's like definitely like pretty far in that quadrant of like someone that thinks about it and has like a startup that he built based on productivity. I agree. I think, and Tim, curious to get your feedback, the best productivity hack for what you do when you're at your desk is actually like optimizing your away from the desk time, long walks, a surf, whatever that is. Kid time too, like take care of your kids so you feel like, all right, they're in a good place. I can really focus.
Yeah, you need to disconnect. But at the same time, I would also say, as soon as I had kids, like I used to read one book per week, but since I have kids, it's like I'm happy if it's one book per quarter or something.
We probably read one book every night before bed too. I mean, can we count that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, if we're counting that, I am crushing the kid book game, just crushing it.
Yeah.
Kay-Kay, one reason I was excited to have you on the show today is you've recently made the transition into quote unquote an enterprise content team or an enterprise in general from more SMB type, startups like Appcues. I mean, Appcues was how many people when you were there?
100, maybe a little north of 100.
Yeah, figured. And how big's Typeform today?
I think we're shy of 300. Not entirely sure on there, but somewhere around there.
Okay. But would you say that these companies operate differently with their content programs?
Absolutely. Bigger team, more resources, things are very different. But what I will say is, I'm not actually sure like how you're defining enterprise or what we can't like truly think enterprise is. But Typeform is a Series C. So when I interviewed for this role, I was talking to our CRO, and she had actually described Typeform as something that really stood out to me as an awkward 8th grader. Like, we don't quite know who we are. We're like trying to figure ourselves out a little bit, but we kind of know who we are, and like our best years are ahead of us. And I think that is kind of how our content program has operated. Typeform has such a strong PLG motion, but if you think about it, like they don't really have like a strong content motion, whereas at Appcues, thank you for the work and the foundation that you laid. There were 3 distinct content properties. I was running a podcast, a YouTube channel, and a full academy. And then at iFixit, I was running a team of 18 people where we had 10,000 repair guides and a YouTube channel with 1 million subscribers and a huge editorial and advocacy arm that would just generate tons and tons of pickups every year. And at Typeform, like we actually don't have that much more of a mature motion in place. So as much as like it's different because it's the enterprise and there's more layers and approvals and stakeholders, it's actually kind of a lot of the same. And so maybe that's why I feel like, yes, it's enterprise, but also content is content, and it just feels very similar.
Yeah, that's interesting. So your point is like, it's not necessarily the headcount, right? Like sometimes a content program is more mature at a smaller, earlier stage company than at a later stage company.
Yeah, and I think that's like kind of a common misconception people have, or maybe one that I had, like, oh, I am moving into this bigger company, so everything is going to be more mature, everything is going to be more developed, we're really going to know who we are. And like, oftentimes that's not the case. A lot of people I talk to in enterprise organizations, it's so much harder to move fast because there's so many stakeholders you need to bring along for the ride. And so like, for example, like we were on Contentful, no shade to Contentful, but that was a really hard CMS for us to be on, and it was really hard to make changes on the fly. And so now we're in Webflow, which is a lot more self-serve, and it's empowered the team to make faster decisions. But even changing out a tool like that, that's like a huge rip and replace project. So when you're in these enterprise organizations, sometimes the processes and tools can be a lot more cumbersome than I expected.
Yeah, totally. It is funny. Like I remember the surprise I felt when I started at UiPath. It's like Series B, 40 million revenue. And we scaled to like $1 billion in revenue. And through that whole period, we didn't have our shit together in every corner, like, and you kind of assume that like the big dogs do, but you can grow really fast and really far without having all your I's dotted and T's crossed. You just have to have great product market fit and like some semblance of a go-to-market motion working.
Yeah, that is so resonant. Just like, I don't know, the more companies I've been at, the more I feel like nobody has their shit together. We're all just figuring it out on the fly. But like the best content marketers can like embrace that and figure that out and just figure out like what lane they can operate in and then just move quickly from there.
Nice. So that leads to a great question of what's the role of content in Typeform?
Yeah, so I run content and social, and under my purview, we have SEO, social, influencer, and employee advocacy. And content, I've been thinking a lot about Emily Kramer. I'm currently doing a customer story with her, so she's really top of mind for me. But she kind of describes content as the fuel. And so she has this idea of fuel and engine. And so the fuel is like all of the messages, the words, the visuals, the copy that you really want to get out into the world. And then the engine is like the systems in place that kind of get it out into the world. So content is the fuel. And I think that is like a really resonant analogy. And that's kind of what we are at Typeform. So we are providing all of those things across the wider org. And so those things can be used and distributed across all of the different touch points.
Got it. And so as you've come into this role, what is your first, how long have you been there now?
Not long. So 6 months.
6
So
months.
keep that in mind for all of my answers in this podcast.
Yeah, well, that's what makes it like ripe and interesting, I think. But in terms of like through this lens of fuel and engine, where have you focused in the first 6 months?
Yeah, so I would say we actually kind of we have a few different content motions in place. We have what I'm calling like foundational content debt that I think we just have to do. So to me, that is a lot of product-led content that maps to our highest impact use cases for the business. And we just don't have a lot of that right now. So we have that kind of always on motion in the background. And then what we are working towards is having a bigger quarterly push of content. And that can come in any form, like an interactive report, an ebook, something that's just a lot bigger that we can source a lot of derivative content that can power our content programs. And so we are like midstream in a really big campaign right now, and that's happening now. And then the third motion that I'm trying to get off the ground is just SME-driven content. I think we're all looking for ways to be more defensible against AI content, and like first-person experiences are going to be the thing that is very important for everyone. And so that's just like in complete infancy. We've like mapped out a few SMEs to talk to internally in our community. And that is like my next big project after we get this big campaign I'm talking about, which will go live in April.
Nice. Talk to me about your SMEs. From what I remember, SMEs.
Oh, I was just like, what?
I have a notion that like they're a bigger deal at an enterprise. Like you have a longer list of them. Have you found that to be true? And then who are they at Typeform? Where do they sit?
I don't know. Typeform is a very interesting product because we can have 1,000 different use cases. And that's actually something very different that I haven't really had that challenge as a content marketer in my previous organizations that were so like, here's the product, here's what it does, but we have so many use cases. And so for SMEs, I like SMEs. I actually also call URL URLs, and everyone's like, what are you saying? So I feel you. I don't necessarily know that we have like a longer list of SMEs just because we are an enterprise. I think potentially we are more connected just because you have more volume of people and people know people. And so you can kind of ping people's connections. And so your network is just larger. Internally, like Typeform is very much for marketers. So I have a team of 30 different marketers on the team. And so we can kind of rely on a lot of those different people. And if you've just been in the industry for a while, marketers know marketers. I think, Ty, we probably share so many connections because we both worked at Appcues. And so that's kind of where we're sourcing internally. We're starting there. And then externally, we're very lucky that we have a pretty involved community, and those are great champions of our product. So that's another great place that we can start, starting with our community champions, looking to our customers that are kind of all-star customers that are, really in the product and are power users. And then externally from that, we're honestly figuring it out. So I run the influencer program, which is kind of interesting. A lot of our influencers, they, when you see their videos, they're talking about use cases, and not because I'm asking them to, but because like they are actual Typeform users of the product and this is their use case. And so I also kind of see our influencer arm as SMEs that I'm hoping to pull into this motion.
Interesting. So they sit all over the place.
Yes.
You have SMEs that are input to content, right? They're like helping you shape some thought leadership, giving you quotes, like that kind of thing. You also have stakeholders within the content org or like outside the content org that like care about what you're producing, right? Kind of gets back to like the role of content being in service of other parts of the business. Maybe just give me an overview of like, who are those stakeholders at Typeform for you?
Depending on the size and the magnitude of the project. So if it's like a really large integrated campaign, like oftentimes I am brought in early as like, hey, can you come represent the content POV? Like give us some watch outs. Like how would you shape this? But I by no means have the final call on the direction of that content that belongs to that campaign. But if something originates in my team, so if it's, social first or content first, like I have the final call. But as far as other stakeholders, I rely a lot on my boss. So I report directly into brand. And so he's the senior director of brand. I go to him for a lot of things, and he runs kind of like our whole creative arm. And then also working closely with product marketing for product-like content, trying to best understand what features or integrations to highlight. And then also working very closely with our growth team. So, that's our best engine. So working closely with them to make sure that our content can have more legs through their distribution channels.
That's great. Really interesting. Take me back to the point you made about where ideas come from, right? You said sometimes content ideas come from the content team or social. I'm curious, like what kinds of ideas? And then you also said when they do, like you're the final sign off on that. I mean, maybe like Kevin, shout out to Kevin. He might look at this too, but like content's ultimately responsible for it. But then when there's a different stakeholder involved, like product marketing, they're signing off on it. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I asked two questions there at once, but again, like where do ideas come from? I think that's the first question.
Sure. So yes, ideas can come from anywhere. Oftentimes we will look at like what is trending in our community or what are people asking in our help center. And also being such a product-led company, there are a lot of product signals within the product itself that we can kind of look at that, see how people are using it and get ideas from there. But my favorite place to get ideas is actually just asking your audience. And I think that's something that is so underrated that content marketers don't do enough. If I look back on my career, my favorite campaigns have always like started from just asking the audience. And that is what MKT1 Emily Kramer is like completely predicated on. Every episode of her Dear Marketer podcast starts with a Typeform where she's asking her audience for ideas, as well as her whole template library that she builds out. She's asking folks like, what should I be building? Something that was really successful at Appcues for me and something that we're trying to really make, codify that into our content creation here at Typeform. We are the perfect tool to be able to ask our audience for things in a regular manner. And soon you will see a lot of content that is a lot more audience driven, that it just incorporates a lot more of their words and their ideas. And that's kind of a big thing that I am trying to really push the envelope on moving forward.
That's awesome. And like so simple.
Like how difficult is it then to get those ideas to the finish line or get them approved? Like, because I can imagine when I think about enterprise, it's like, oh, there's a lot of people are going to say, oh, but this idea has this problem and this idea doesn't fit with this guideline and this idea doesn't. Is that a reality? And is these different at the companies you've been?
Yeah, it's definitely different. It's definitely different. At Appcues, by the end of it, I was like a content team of one. So I could have an idea and ship it literally the same day. And that was great. And it's just, that's not the reality here. There are a lot of approvals and layers. But again, it's kind of like, how big is the scope of the project? Does it need design? How many layers does it have to go through? And so that really shapes, and it also shapes like what projects I want to go after. So I've been really big on trying to build essentially like modular systems in Webflow since we moved to Webflow. So like, let's build all the building blocks. So like I can go run and make an interactive report after we make our first one. Like I can keep polling our audience and I can keep surveying our audience, but then I'm not going to have to rely on our web team or our design team to be able to build me this from scratch. And that's kind of how we're building out our Webflow instance right now so that like we can run with ideas a lot faster. But as far as like who green lights the idea, honestly, I've been there 6 months and like I can't really say there is a hard and fast system or rule in place. In addition to me being there for 6 months, we have new leadership. So we got a new CEO and a new CRO, and they started about 3 months ago, and they also kind of have a different flavor. But I think having kind of the always on motion of the use case content that kind of hits on like our product, and then being able to take these other bigger swings on somewhat of a consistent cadence has been really helpful in just kind of checking all of the boxes for a lot of the different stakeholders. So I can make sure that it's like, we're still focused on business, meeting customers where they are, solving their problems, and then also, starting the thought leadership with the SME interviews, and then, taking the bigger content swings with like interactive reports and stuff like that.
I want to bring it back to your little playbook around asking your audience, what do they want to hear? Or like, what could be helpful? Can you get really tactical there for me? It sounds simple. Go ask your audience. Like, how do you do that? Are you sending out an email? Are you posting on LinkedIn? Like, what does that actually look like for Typeform or for you in the past?
Yeah, it can be all of those things. So at Typeform, at Appcues, I literally asked like, what kind of content do you want to hear from? And like, I was so surprised. I got back like 150 responses of people. And, it varies. It could be anything from, like they're clearly stuck on somewhere in the product, or they want to hear more about, I don't know, some very specific niche thing about onboarding. Like, okay, how do I do more flywheels and make my product more interesting? And so I think it really can be that simple. It's just we don't do it. So you can just send it out in an email. I've had less success with like LinkedIn polls. Yeah, honestly, most of it has been just coming from an email, and it doesn't have to be that deep. Just ask. And that's exactly what Emily Kramer does. She puts it in an email. I think she also throws it in her LinkedIn feed, but that's it. And then I've always been so surprised at how willing people are to help and just they want to volunteer information.
Well, then in return, you're going to help them, right? Like if I am an Appcues user and want to figure out how to build some growth flywheel with the product, like, I might be helping you by volunteering the idea or the problem, but then assumedly you might help me out by answering it.
Exactly. And actually, just to go back to our SME conversation really quick, something I did at Appcues was I also asked SMEs in our community for quotes in mass. So I was like, hey, how would you solve this? Or if I had a question where I wanted a quote, I would just pose that in a Typeform to the Appcues newsletter, and I would get back a bunch of people and I would ask like different questions. And then I just had a bank of quotes that I could use throughout our content. If something was really interesting, I would ask someone to hop on the phone with me. And then that was another way that we could kind of line up more customers to talk to.
So practical. Yeah, write that one down. It's just like, that's something everybody could do today in order to beef up their, editorial roadmap.
Yeah.
Nice. Tim, did you write that down?
I literally wrote it down. Yeah, we're going to do that. And we should ask it also before the podcast, It's like we have you coming on the podcast. What do you want to know? Like things like that.
Yeah,
That's cool.
Yeah. 6 months in, what, if anything, has surprised you that's like in this category of like, bigger company, enterprise content over your onboarding process?
Yeah. I think I thought coming into this role, a bigger company with a bigger budget and more resources meant I would ship faster. And that is just, we've kind of talked about that, but that's like really not the case. There are more approvals, more layers, more stakeholders. And I just don't think I was prepared for that. And so I think that has been like really the biggest shock. Just more resources, more budget does not mean more work that's produced.
Yeah. What do you make of that? Like, is the outcome improved, such as the quality of the piece, or what's the consequence of that?
I think having come from scrappy startups, it was a little bit challenging for me to not ship as fast. And I don't necessarily think one is better than the other. It's just very different. I think that creativity is like bred in constraints. And, when you're in a scrappy startup, you're kind of like, oh, I don't have any money. We're going to like hack this thing together and it's just going to work. And you feel good about that. And I've really kind of just shifted my thinking like, this is also a constraint. The constraint is things are going to take longer. You have to include more people. And so I don't necessarily know if the outcome is necessarily like better or worse. It's just different. And also audiences are different. So it's really kind of hard to compare apples to oranges.
Fair. Are there any politics at an enterprise that you can speak to that like you've kind of noticed? Like, does that feel meaningfully different?
I have been pleasantly surprised that I haven't had to deal with it too much yet. But again, 6 months in, I still kind of feel like I'm in the honeymoon period. I'm very green and excited and all of these things. I'm like, yeah, I'll go learn this and do these things. So I don't think I've had to deal with it more so than any other company yet. But, if you ask me in 6 months, that answer might change.
Yeah. Okay. We'll circle back. How are you KPI'd?
This one's interesting. So in previous roles, I've been a lot more performance focused because I've reported either to demand gen or the VP of marketing directly. And now being on the brand side of things, I think it's different. I do think that part of the reason I was brought in was to establish more of a performance culture in content in addition to just being brand led. And so I am pushing for more revenue driven KPIs and just like seeing the full effect of like how content is affecting different parts of the funnel. But the other thing that I have reported on both at Appcues and now that we're kind of like honing in on as our content North Star is the idea of an owned audience. And so just looking at folks that are, raising their hand saying, we want to engage with you. So when they are ready to buy, like we are top of mind for them. So I think owned audience is the biggest metric that we're kind of rallied around right now.
AI. Are you guys using any AI or how are you thinking about it?
Yeah. So again, at previous companies like at Appcues, like AI was my best friend because it had to be, because I didn't really have anyone to help me. So I would use it
Because you had
for
no other friends there to like
I
go.
had
But
no other friends. What a sad, lonely life for Kay-Kay. So, previously I used it to like write meta descriptions, brief, and I would use it as just like my content partner, someone to talk to if I got lonely in the day. AI was everything for me. It was really helpful for cutting down clips, finding, if we did a YouTube video, getting the transcript, just those types of things. And here, honestly, like I sit in meetings for so long in my day that like my biggest use of AI right now is just helping me in the briefing process. We have really big briefs that we have to create. And if I'm being honest, I don't know, sure, I was frustrated by that process at first because it was so different to me coming from someone who's like, why am I going to brief this when I can just do it? Why would I spend so much time briefing it when I could just go do this myself? But, knowing that there are so many people that need to be involved in something, like you really got to get a good brief, because if you have a good brief and everyone is aligned up front, it makes everything easier in the back half. So that's actually like my biggest use case of AI right now.
What does the AI do? Does it
What
make
does
the
the
brief,
AI
or does
do?
it summarize the meetings? Or like, can you zoom in on what happens there?
Yeah, it kind of just helps me sharpen my thinking and like gives me a lot of watch outs to be like, is this clear? Is this the best way to kind of get this point across? Sometimes it'll help me with structure, but we have kind of a loose briefing process in place and a request process, but I'm always trying to like make that better, because I think once you do have a good brief, like that actually helps eliminate so many of these meetings that I'm talking about in the back half of things.
You said request process, and I'm nerdy enough about content that I want to hear about this too. This is like a request of the content team's resources for, on behalf of product marketing or demand gen. Is that correct? Can you take us through the nuts and bolts there, if so?
Sorry, I was actually talking about the request process that I have to go through when I need to request design resources. So
I
that was
see.
the request process that I was talking about.
So do you have, assumingly, a Typeform for if demand gen needs something for you? Like, how do they come and approach you and make an ask?
This is maybe shocking, but we actually don't have a formal system in place at this moment,
Cool.
which is, I think, a blessing and a curse. Like, Kevin, my boss, has been very big on that content shouldn't just be a request-based organization. And he has put so many guardrails in place to make sure that doesn't happen. Obviously, there's going to be some friction there, because if content or if demand gen needs something, or if product marketing needs something, like how do we negotiate that? What we're trying to do is just like zoom out, look at the bigger picture. As a marketing organization, we do planning in like H1, H2, and then we try to see like what are the initiatives coming up, and then we kind of tackle those one by one together, making sure that we are layering them on top of each other to build more momentum, and not necessarily just like we're so siloed, and it is absolutely not perfect. But I do appreciate that I am not just a request-based organization, but like right now I'm working on a partner ebook with our partner marketing manager. And it was an opportunity for us to get in front of an audience that was like, we're working with ActiveCampaign and Calendly, and that was a great opportunity for us. It had business impact. And so we kind of negotiated resources with design, and we're bringing it to life. And so it's launching tomorrow. Stay tuned.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's exciting. Okay, so this notion is really interesting of like a request-based, and I've called it like service-focused content team versus like a strategic one, or like one that's not. And the form is kind of like the symbol, right, of a more request-based or service-oriented content team versus one that's like, coming up with more ideas on their own and shipping. So I guess one, thank you for that. And then of course it earns another question. What percentage of the content that your team is producing is request-based? Like even though you don't have a form, it's like informally request-based versus like your ideas, I call it strategic-based.
70-30, 70 us, 30 request-based.
All right. Scoring some big points for the content team. Nice.
Yeah.
Can I throw a curveball?
Yes.
I look at you as a content marketer that like has a really creative approach to content marketing, right? You don't hire Kay-Kay to like write ebooks and white papers and like kind of like run the same playbook that you've seen at like, old fangled B2B startups. Like you hire Kay-Kay to like, I don't know, like do some Valentine's Day card campaign, or like, something that's more interesting. Maybe you can help articulate this point for the audience with some examples, but I want to get to know like what's at the core of that, and it's probably like a lot about just who you are and you have the courage to do these things, but can you help our audience just like get a little inspired to think outside the box and sort of the well-trodden path of content marketing and do something more unique or differentiated or authentic to them?
That's not a big question at all. Let me see how I can bring the audience along. So thank you. I think I am someone who is recognized as being kind of a creative. I think it comes down to permission. Like you have to have someone that'll just give you permission to take a big swing and fail. I have a lot of things in my portfolio that have not gone the way that I thought they were going to go. And like, that's just kind of a part of it. And so you just spoke to a Valentine's Day campaign. So at one point in Appcues for Valentine's Day, we wanted to send our customers some love. And we somehow wrangled a lot of different people at the company to send singing Valentines, rapping Valentines. We did like spoken poetry. And I think, all of our feeds are just taken up by the same B2B noise, especially. And so how do you break that? And sometimes it's going to be cringe. Like, I think you have to be okay with being a little bit cringe. Like, that's part of the job of being a creative. And that's honestly the hardest part. You're like, oh man, like the day that we launched that, the former director of growth at Appcues is actually the director of growth at Typeform. So we worked together in both places. We were working really closely on that. And we had this moment where we were like, is this too cringe? Like, are people going to hate this?
Yeah.
But people really loved it. Cause like, if you're a customer, just think about being a human for like 2 seconds. Like, do you really want to read an ebook? Like, yes, like, but also like, if you just woke up and like your CSM sent you a singing Valentine, you'd be like, what? Like, that's so random, but like so cool. And so, yeah, just kind of that. I actually think that good process leaves room for creativity. Like a good process should enable creativity, right? And so one of the things that I talk about a lot in my team, and they're probably sick of it, is just I have this idea that like you should not ship something or you shouldn't even execute an idea if you can't articulate the one thing that someone should walk away with after like consuming that. And if you can rally around that right at the beginning, you will have like such a better time brainstorming. People will be bought into your idea, and that just makes like the entire creative process a lot better. And that's just kind of been like a very loose framework. And so I'm thinking about a campaign that I ran at iFixit, and the biggest barrier so iFixit's all about self-repair, and the biggest barrier wasn't necessarily technical ineptitude, but it was people just being scared. People didn't want to open their devices because it's scary. They think they're going to break something. And so that was the goal. Like the message was repair is for everyone. We had a brainstorm, had the entire team come in. I wanted a wide variety of ideas. I told them to pull from old ad campaigns, and someone had brought, it was like an old Victoria's Secret campaign of like, I'm no angel, where they wanted to like represent different people and sizes. And we kind of like loved that and ran with it. So I got a bunch of first-time fixers to fix something for the first time on camera. And the whole idea was like, anybody could fix something. You don't have to be a genius, because Apple branded it the Genius Bar. Fixing is for everyone. And actually, when we were filming, one of the girls was like, I asked her to say, I'm no genius. And she was like, no, I am a genius. I just fixed my laptop. And she was so proud of herself. And I was like, yes, that is so much more powerful. So we shifted the campaign. Way more empowering. And so things like that, you just have to just open yourself to those ideas and like be so clear at the message you want to give. And I think that is actually where you can like be super creative.
That was awesome. Thank you for sharing a little, piece of your mind, piece of your heart. I do make up though, because I worked, with Jackson and the leadership team at Appcues as well. And having some alignment or buy-in, right, from that exec team, it's pretty critical to be able to like be a little weird, right? Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Was it part of discussions of hiring you in this role, for example? I wonder how much of an asset is it in your career?
Yeah, that was one of the reasons I got hired at Appcues. I think they looked at my profile and they wanted to make a foray into YouTube. And I think in my case study interview, I talked about Taco Bell content marketing, how like I like to make things and splice it up and like make a lot of derivative content. But I definitely was kind of like billed as like the creative on the team. And the same thing here. So Kevin hired me because Kevin has a B2C background, and he was like, B2B content is boring. We all think that, like, we need to change it up. We need to take bigger swings, and we need to take inspiration from a lot of different places. And so, you know, I have been very fortunate. Like, that's every content marketer's dream, right? Like, you get to take big swings and you get to work on wild ideas. And one of the ideas that we're working on, I can't take credit for it because it was Kevin's idea. And I think he was actually very much looking for a creative partner to be able to kind of execute on this type of work. But he took inspiration from like reality TV. And so our campaign that we're working on right now definitely has like hallmarks of reality TV in it.
Can't wait to see what you put out
that
there.
sounds exciting.
Yeah, for just all the future work that's going to come out of Typeform. I mean, I think you've got a great team there to do some interesting stuff. Kay-Kay, thanks for coming on. It's great to have you.
Where can people follow you?
Fortunately and unfortunately, I'm not chronically online anymore. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not super active there, but I will be eventually.
Cool. Well, thanks again for coming.
Thanks, guys. This was great.
Thanks so much.
Tim, I've had the privilege of chatting with Kay-Kay a few times now. I'm curious what your first impression was.
No, it's great. It's very nice. She articulates very clearly how she thinks about things, very creative, very, very honest also. Like, I was worried that, like, we might see that in the future with other interviews, but like that there would be things like, oh, I can't talk about this, or like, I feel it's like, oh, it's enterprise, so it's very buttoned up, but I thought she was very, very open about the culture and about how the approval processes and long meetings sometimes and things like that. So yeah, I think it was a kind of transparent look into how things work. Yeah, a lot of cool ideas actually.
Totally. Yes, she's got a lot of good campaigns in the hopper. I do think Typeform's interesting because they're kind of like a step further along than SMBs, but like they're not full-blown public company enterprise like a lot of the guests we're going to talk to in the season. So this was like, for me, an interesting bridge episode. I agree. I thought that it was interesting to hear about her. I don't think she framed it as a frustration, but, you know, she's spending a lot more time in meetings and the importance of a brief becoming, you know, elevated versus when you're operating in a different kind of company. So that was a good takeaway I had that I hadn't really thought of before. And the other thing that really enlightened me was the idea of not having a request form as a content team at a larger company is like quite appealing. It's like, hey, what if we just killed this form? Like, what happens then? Could that let us be a little more strategic, a little bit more in control of our roadmap, and therefore position less as, you know, in service to other parts of the organization?
Yeah, I think so too. I've seen that discussion before somewhere as well, where some people are saying, yeah, it has to have a form because otherwise it's like out of control. And some people say, no, the form like kills everything, like all creativity and makes it bureaucracy. So yeah, I think the form is kind of like a stereotype symbol for enterprise. So I think that's a good one to hit on and see how others do that. I think the other thing I like, we didn't go very deep on that, but like that they switched to Webflow and that allows her to actually be more creative because like, and the team and be more agile. And I think that's also interesting to think about, like, what can you do to kind of empower the team or unlock yourself out of some of the disadvantages that come from being in a bigger organization, where if you don't do that, it's like, oh, I have to get approval here, or I have to wait for this resource there, and like how you move things maybe close to the team so that you can keep, your agility and your creativity.
I'm also curious as we talk to companies that maybe focus a little, like Typeform has kind of this PLG motion, right? They sell to, yes, larger companies, but also small companies. I'm curious how like, target market and also go-to-market motion has an impact on how the content team is set up, right? Who their stakeholders are, how they're KPI'd, do they have the request form or not? Those elements.
And what she said also, which I thought was interesting to maybe as a recurring theme, where she was like, when I have a bigger budget and more resources, we're actually not shipping more content, right? I think that's also very interesting. And actually kind of makes sense. I can totally see that there's just more stuff to deal with, so things go slower, and how people deal with that.
Definitely. From my experience, enterprise content is more accurate because of all the individuals, touching it. So, the voice and tone is looked at often by, someone on content. The product messaging might have product marketing looking at it. And so for me, the outcome is like, okay, it is more accurate, which is a form of quality, one could argue, but it doesn't mean that like the thing is like, has a better hook and like, it's like, has more polish on it. it can just mean that it's better aligned to all these important
I wonder how
elements.
much of that can be actually, put my AI hat on again, like how much of that can eventually
Yeah.
be sped up with AI, where you just have your checks and balances in an agent or something, who then it's like, okay, it's been checked by the agent from this department, it's been checked by the agent from this department, so that you can get more speed.
Yeah, probably
Yeah.
some amount of it.
Cool. Looking forward to the next one.
Same.